Hi everybody. Here's a recording of part of a training I gave earlier this month to some of my colleagues. It covers how to install CA Application Delivery Analysis, also known as NetQS SuperAgent. The recording is made possible by Aspire Technical Professionals, a CA partner providing services for CA's service assurance and security products. More info about Aspire can be found at www.aspiretp.com. Any scripts and blog posts that I reference in the video can be found at stuart.winave.com. So without any further ado, here we go.
Alright, so this virtual machine that I'm working with here is just a blank Windows 2008 box. It's the only thing that I've done on it is renamed it. I ran Windows updates, obviously activated it, and I've turned off IPv6 on that first NIC. We're going to go through the process of configuring the second NIC to get it booted up here. Those are some things we need to do in order to make sure that it's ready. Plus, that's it. That's all that I've done. I haven't done anything else. So this is very much starting from a blank box here. There we go. Got to start it up properly. I'm going to go ahead and go into network connections here. No, come on. There we go. And I'm going to make this primary one my manager. And this other NIC is going to be my monitor NIC. This is a safe thing to do in your production system, to go ahead and rename the NICs. It's not going to hurt anybody, and it makes sure you're actually using the right NIC, configuring the right NIC, getting things in the right order. So first, let's go ahead and configure these NICs. On the management side, that can be configured however the customer needs it to be configured. So if he needs a static IP, if he needs special DNS or whatever the case may be, just configure that however it needs to be configured. The monitor NIC, however, does need to be configured a little bit specially. The nice thing about it is that pretty much everything has to be off. So we're going to go ahead and turn off, sorry, not IPv4, everything but IPv4, right? And then we're going to go in and configure IPv4. And instead of using DHCP, we're going to assign it a dummy IP address. And the reason that has to be a dummy IP address, and look in the install instructions, but it needs to be a dummy IP address because we don't really need this NIC to actually communicate on the network. In my situation, it is plugged into the network, but under a real-life scenario, this NIC is going to be plugged into the SPAN port on your switch or into the ANUI or whatever it is. But in order for the SuperAgent, whenever I say SuperAgent, it's equivalent to ADA or Application Delivery Analysis. SuperAgent's been the name for the past 10 years. So whenever the SuperAgent software has to have a way to identify each monitor NIC. So you need to assign it an IP address. It's usually a good idea to go ahead and assign a different dummy IP address on each monitor NIC in the entire system. So if you have 5 collectors, then what I would do is on collector 1, I would assign 1111, and on collector 2, I would do 1112, and so on all the way out to 1115. The subnet doesn't matter, but you do need to set something because Windows won't let you not set something. DNS server is not needed. Go ahead and go into advanced. One of the things you want to make sure that you disable on the DNS tab is you want to make sure that this connection is not registered in DNS. If the customer has a Windows hosted DNS or a DNS system run by Windows, then if you don't uncheck that, then this server will contact the DNS server and register both of his IP addresses in DNS, which means that the fully qualified domain name in some instances will resolve to 1111, which we don't want. So you want to make sure you uncheck the register this connection's address in DNS. Go over to the Wins tab, disable LM hosts, and disable NetBIOS. Okay, so everything is turned off for that NIC. The NIC is not really going to be able to communicate via IP with anybody, but that's great because we don't need it to communicate. We just want it to receive data. Alright, so that's pretty much it for the NIC. We don't need to do anything else. In a VMware environment, if you're building this up in a lab, if you want this NIC to capture data, there's different ways to do it. If you're running it on ESX, then what you'll need to do is set up a monitored port group and set up promiscuous mode. All of that is actually detailed in the install docs. It's pretty easy. You just put the monitored port group into the monitor port into a monitor port group, turn on promiscuous mode, and then turn on promiscuous mode on any port groups you want to capture. And then that will allow this monitor port to pick up that data. If you're running VMware, not really going to work for an enterprise scenario, but it will work for our purposes. So if you set it up as bridged, then this monitor NIC will bind with your physical NIC on your host, and any traffic in and out of your physical host will get captured by this monitor NIC. Okay. All right. A couple of things to look at. You'll want to make sure you have 2 hard drives, a C drive and a D drive. And I just go ahead and whenever I'm building these, I just give them 100 gigabytes of space, but don't really require that much. For the C drives, however much the best practice is for Windows 2008. Windows 2008 tends to grow pretty rapidly with the Windows side-by-side folder. So every time you run Windows up, your Windows side-by-side folder can double or triple or quadruple in size. So, give it enough space on the C drive. On the D drive for Super Agent, if this is just a master console, then you're not going to need, you're going to need more than any other situation, but you're not going to need a whole lot. You could probably get away with 30 or 40 gigabytes to begin with, especially if it's just a lab box. If it's a production box, you'll probably want to be upwards of 60 or 70 gigabytes just to make sure that you have enough space for future expansion. And make sure that they're the C drive and the D drive. You don't want C and E. You don't want your optical drive to be the D drive. So move that out if you need to, so that when you put in that second drive, he's the D drive. Okay. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do the 2008 prep script. So on my blog at stuart.weebly.com, which I'm about to take you to, you can find this script. I wrote this PowerShell script because I didn't want to have to keep going through this configuration every time. So let me show what that does here. So over on the right side, scroll down and you can see the W2K8 prep.ps1, Windows 2008 prep.ps1. So if you click on that, and it's probably going to block it. Oh, no, good. Click here to download your attachment. Current settings do not allow it to be downloaded. That's wonderful. That's probably because of enhanced security configuration. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cheat and go grab it from my guy here. It's technically the exact same file. And I like to put all my stuff in D installers. It gives me a good place to know where to go. If I open up this script, which by the way opens up in Notepad, it's the first thing it's going to do is it's going to ask for a parameter. C installers. It's going to ask for a parameter, the path of where you want to download or configure this stuff. It's kind of the working directory for the script. If you don't specify anything, then it'll put it in C installers. And the PowerShell scripts, in order for PowerShell scripts to run, you actually have to run this command first. And all of this has to be done with administrator. Let me go ahead and get that started here. So I'm going to right-click this, right-click run as admin. Yes. Be nice if I put the space in there. Okay. W2K8 prep D : installers. So it says that my working directory is going to be D : installers. So it's going to prompt, we run this, is going to prompt us for all of the different things that need to be done to a Windows 2008 box in order for the NetQS software to work. So this is regardless for Super Agent, NetFlow Analysis, NetVoyant, or any of the other boxes. They all require basically the same configuration, plus the script has a couple of extras, like disabling Internet Explorer Enhanced Security Configuration. So if you want to do that, you just say yes. If you've already run the script and you've already performed that action, you just want to skip over it, you can hit no. But we haven't done anything, so I'm going to go ahead and yes. It disables that. I'm going to say yes to disable user account control. Disable data execution prevention is actually required. You have to disable that. Disable the Windows firewall, sure. Download the Flash installer. We'll actually download Flash to the installers, and I'll go ahead and say yes. It should download that for us. If we look in the installers, we should see it show up here. Yeah, see, there's the Flash installer right there. Alright, so we'll continue on. It asks if we want to download Java. That's if we need Java on this box, then we want to go ahead and download it. Some of the NetQS products require Java, particularly NetVoyant, and all of the new products, the new stuff that goes with IM2.0. Super Agent doesn't need the Java installer, so I'm going to go ahead and skip that one. Then it prompts you to install missing roles and features. You'll want to say yes on this one because this actually installs all of the roles and features like ASP, the COM services, the IIS web services, all of the different things that you're going to need for the Windows OS itself to be able to handle the software calls that the software is going to make. So you hit yes on that, and that'll run that installation. Okay, so after we enable RP connections, the next part is to uninstall .NET 4.40. .NET 4.0 is a big bad guy as far as the NetQS products are concerned. None of them work with .NET 4.0. They were all actually written with .NET 2. They were subsequently patched so that they could work with .NET 3.5, and they have not yet patched them to work with .NET 4. So what that means is that if .NET 4.0 is installed, we need to uninstall it, and that's actually what the script is going to do. Looks like the script is ready. It says, do you want to enable RDP connections? I'll say yes. And then it says, do you want to try and uninstall .NET 4.0? And that looks like I have a misspelling. So I'll say yes, I want to uninstall .NET 4.0. It found it. It's uninstalling it. You can see on it because it says .NET 4.0 extended profile detected, client profile detected. So now it's going to do the uninstall. The kicker is the .NET 4.0 uninstall automatically kicks off a reboot. So we can watch this all we want. As soon as that part finishes, it's going to reboot on us. And this PowerShell script, like I said, you can use this PowerShell script for any Windows 2008 box to run the various different things. If you just want to be able to go through and do simple things like disabling RDP, disabling enhanced security configuration, user account control, firewall, DEP, stuff like that, you can do that. Just run the script and say yes to those parts and no to the other parts, and you're good to go. At the end of the script, once it reboots, if we run it again and we skip all the way to the end, then the last thing that happens is actually it downloads and installs Windows updates for you. So we'll just watch for another couple seconds here. He finishes doing that uninstall. Alright, so now that box is rebooting. So Super Agent, what Super Agent does is it sits there and it measures the transaction speed for the transactions that it captures. So what you do is you take your key application and you span that data into Super Agent, and Super Agent watches that transaction and it measures how long it takes for the server to respond, how long it takes for the packets to get out to the user and the acknowledgement to come back, and how long it takes for the response data to get put onto the wire, et cetera, et cetera. So all of those measurements that Super Agent can do, it'll then measure all of that, run some pretty advanced analysis on it as far as baselining and comparison to normal and all that kind of stuff, and then it'll help you know where you've got problems. Specifically, Super Agent, if you wanted to boil it down to a real easy way to understand what it does, Super Agent sits right next to a server and points the direction either to the left hand or the right hand and says either the stuff on the right hand is slower than it usually is, or the stuff on the left hand is slower than it usually is. So if you sit Super Agent right next to the server, on his right hand is the server. Well, if he says what's on my right hand is slower than usual, then you know you got a problem with the server. If he says what's on the left hand is slower than usual, then you got something between the super agent and the end user that's being slow, whether that be a switch or a router or a WAN link or whatever it may be. Alright, so our box is finished rebooting. We'll go ahead and look at things here. We've got all of our configuration has finished as far as the OS. So now what we can do is we can go ahead and kick off our installer. You'll notice we've got ADA setup 9378. That's the current version of ADA. And we've also got our Flash installer that was downloaded via the script. So we're going to go ahead and run our installer here and get that going. Installer is fairly straightforward. Don't really need to do a whole lot. It's just a next kind of thing. The upgrade is actually not the exact same software. It's instead of saying ADA setup, it's ADA upgrade, or ADA upgrade 9378. You run that and it automatically detects what you already have installed and upgrades whatever you already have installed. But the setup does require one little choice that we'll have to make, basically to tell it what we want to install. Alright, so next, accept the terms, next. This is the important part. We want to figure out exactly what we want to install. Now, like I said, we can have two kinds of super agent. You can have a standalone super agent where everything is on one box, or you can have a distributed super agent where you have the master console on one box and then a bunch of collectors out there distributed throughout the data center. So the same software is used to install all of those. You just make your choice here. Distributed manager is where you have a distributed model and this box that you're installing is the manager. That's not the case that we want. Standalone manager is the one that we want, where we have a standalone system with a collector built in, all on one box. The other options are single port monitor and virtual systems monitor, which technically behind the scenes there's no difference between these two, but that's your collector. So if you were doing a distributed model and you were installing a collector, this would be it. Alright, so we're going to do standalone manager. That's what we're going to do in my lab here. Default install location is actually CCA. I don't like that. I like it to be on the D drive because I like to separate my application drive from my system drive. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change that. I'm going to go to C to D, make a new folder. I'm going to do it in NetQS actually, just because I like to be contrary and I like to use the old name. So NetQS is where I'm going to install this. I'm going to hit next, and then next, and it'll kick off the install. While that install is running, I'm going to go ahead and get our license file in place. So I'm going to grab this license file, and all we need to do is put that in NetQoS and then create a new folder called license, and then drop that folder in there. As long as you have that file in the install directory /licenses, then your software will be licensed. That's how you install the license file. It's really quite easy. Alright, so now that the installation is completed, I'm going to go ahead and allow it to reboot, which is good. Just like I said, next, pretty much, and you're good to go. And that should reboot here shortly. And then really after the reboot, we're ready to start configuring. We should start. We should see data on our collector NIC. All we got to do is configure the software to actually monitor the servers that we want to monitor here. Assuming it ever reboots. There it goes. Alright, so we've rebooted, and now I go in and look. The first thing I want to check is I want to check that NIC. So what I want to look at here, I'll open up this the network connections folder. And I want to look at that secondary NIC because I want to make sure that it's actually getting data. So you can actually just put status, and you can see that it's getting data, very little, but it is getting data. In a production environment, you could easily see this jump up to 1 million, to 2 million, to 1 billion really quickly. But you want to make sure that this packets received is definitely incrementing, because that tells you that you actually are receiving packets coming into that NIC. You have something to analyze. So that's great. Everything looks good there. I'm going to go ahead and close that and close that. Now what I can do is I can pull up Internet Explorer and go to localhost. So if I go localhost and pull that up, it's going to take a minute for it to come up. One of the first things that the software has to do is it has to ask you to identify which NIC is your management NIC and which NIC is your monitor NIC. So that should pop up first thing here. There we go. Don't show this message again. Go away. All right. So what it's asking is, what is your management NIC? And it looked at your two NICs and it saw that, okay, we've got one NIC with this IP address and one NIC with this IP address. And it figured out which one is likely my management IP address. So I clicked that one. It was already clicked for me. I hit OK, and that's pretty good to go. I've kind of finished my initial configuration. Software is up and running. Now we'll have to just configure the software to actually do something. If you don't configure anything, SuperAgent will not do anything. All right, SuperAgent will not do anything unless you tell it to do it. So what we now need to do is we now need to tell SuperAgent exactly what we want to track, right? But before we can get to that, I think we're going to have to add our collector. Yeah, there we go. So if you go over to the Administration tab and you look at it, you'll see that your ADA monitoring device list is blank. So our ADA monitor device is actually this same server. What we need to do is we need to add this server into this server in order to get it to recognize that. If this were a distributed situation, we would just add all of our remote collectors that we've set up. We do that just by clicking Add ADA Monitor, and we put in the IP address 209, I think it was, right? I got it on DHCP, so I'm not paying attention. Yeah, 209. You can add the IP address and then click DNS, and it should come back with a name. Assuming you have pop-ups allowed, and it doesn't like 10, so we'll just do this. The name doesn't really matter. What really matters is the IP address. And then right here, it actually went out and it queried that IP address and found out, hey, you've got a monitor NIC right here. So click that monitor NIC, make sure he's the one that's selected. If you have a different monitor NIC, if you have like 3 monitor NICs on here, you need to add whichever one is receiving the packets. Everything else you can leave as the default. Hit OK. So now we've got our monitor, our collector, or what they're now calling a monitor, is out there and connected to the SuperAgent Master Console. So he's now connecting. You can kind of think of this as the hub talking to the probe, or even the hub talking to the probe with a robot, because that's what the collector is kind of a probe with a robot. All right, so now that we've added that, obviously right here it tells us what our next step is. We need to add some networks. Now in SuperAgent, SuperAgent tracks all of our data by IP address, and so what it does is it looks at the incoming packets, and it looks at the source and the destination IP address in those incoming packets. Now, if the source or destination IP address is in our server list, which we haven't configured yet, but if it is in our server list, then SuperAgent goes ahead and monitors it. The other IP address, whichever it is, if the server was the source, then we look at the destination IP address. That destination IP address needs to be in a network list. And the reason it needs to be in a network list is because we don't necessarily want to monitor every single user, but we also don't want to monitor every single server. So the next 2 steps, monitoring networks, or configuring networks and configuring servers, is where we're going to specify what users we're going to monitor and what servers we're going to monitor. And you can be really picky about this if you want, and just put in the ones that you want, or you can just add a generic list, or whatever you want to do. You can import by file if you want. So you hit this little triangle right here, and you hit import from file, and you can import a CSV. Here's the syntax of the CSV. So if you wanted to, you could just import a CSV, and a lot of times customers will have some kind of Excel spreadsheet that you can turn into a CSV that you can import into here. One of the things we want to make sure is, remember how I said if we don't configure a network, then SuperAgent is not going to watch it. One of the things we're going to want to configure, probably manually, is a catch-all. And we configure it with 000 and a /0, which is basically every IP address everywhere. All right. Once we do that, that means that we're going to monitor every user everywhere, no matter where they are. It's a good catch-all to make sure that we actually monitor everything. And I'm going to add in my home network here, 1/24, and hit OK. All right. So now I've got two network subnets in here, which basically means if I see any transactions from any users in either of these two sets, then I do want to go ahead and monitor them, and I'm going to put them in the correlating buckets. I've got one bucket for those IP addresses and one bucket for these IP addresses. If we have a user IP address or a client IP address that matches two networks, like 192.168.1.1, it would technically match both of these subnets. SuperAgent will put it in the better match, right? So if the IPS matches this subnet better, then it will put it in this bucket. If it matches this subnet better, it'll put it in this bucket. Okay. Not too much concern with this. One of your other options is floating around out there a CSV of all of the private subnet IP addresses, like all the 192.168s, the 172.16s, and the 10 dots. You can take that CSV and just import that. And that gives you a nice, good starting place to go. If the customer doesn't have any idea what networks to give you, then go ahead and put that in. It's a good spot, and that way you're not waiting on the customer for something he doesn't know to give you. All right. Next thing, we're going to go ahead and add servers. This is where we specify for SuperAgent what servers we actually want to monitor. Now, there's two ways you can do this. You can either put in a server subnet and tell SuperAgent to watch for any server in that subnet. And that's pretty easy. You just do a server subnet and say, this is going to be the data center VLAN. And for me, it would be the same subnet. You could put any subnet you wanted in here. You could put your, let's say that all the servers for the customer are in this data center, and the data center uses one of three VLANs. Well, okay, 10.0.0/24, 10.1.0.0. Let's do 10.0.1.0/24, 10.0.2.0/24. So that could be an example of some subnets that you could put in. Now, what that would do is SuperAgent would look for any servers within this address range, these three IP address ranges. But I actually don't want to do that, because what I like to do is I like to add the individual servers that I know I want to monitor. So, for example, I know I want to monitor 110, which is, let's see if DNS will come up. Yes, Emily. All right. So I've added in this server here. I've given it the IP address, and it resolved, figured out that was the name. I would like to give it an SNMP profile name, but I haven't configured any. We'll get to that later. The monitors, I've only got the one monitor out there, and which port is it coming in? That one. Everything else you can leave as default. Okay, so now I've added in this server. I add in another server. Let's see, if I can do this, SharePoint. You can put in the name and click IP, and it, yeah, there we go, resolves the IP for me. And let's see, what other servers can I put in here? That's probably the ones I've got. Oh, well, I can put this same server out here. Let's do SuperAgent. I can use SuperAgent, monitor SuperAgent. No reason I can't. All right, I've got these 3 servers in my server list. That means I've told SuperAgent these are the 3 server IP addresses that I want SuperAgent to monitor. So anytime it sees any of the users from any of these subs talking to any of these servers, SuperAgent is going to monitor that transaction. If it's a transaction that's outside of one of those combinations, then SuperAgent's not going to monitor it. Okay? So we'll go ahead and synchronize our collection devices. So whenever you make a change on the master console, you can make 1 change or you can make 50 changes. Those changes don't actually get applied until you synchronize the monitor device. And that's why that message pops up. It says you need to synchronize your monitor devices. You can wait to synchronize your monitor devices until you've made all of your changes. Or if you want to go bit by bit by bit, you can do that too. There's no harm doing it either way. And IE10 really does not like that JavaScript. And that doesn't like to resize. Well, you can't really see it, but it says monitoring device SuperAgent being completed, so that's good. We'll close it. That was going to happen. So there we go. So now we should see my SuperAgent collector running at IP address 209 is running, collecting on the packets, has not collected any data yet, but it should be working to see anytime any of these IP addresses act as clients, these IP addresses acting as servers. And we can minimize this, and we can actually, on the desktop of every collector, is going to be a little icon called ADA Monitor Activity. And if you double click on that, you can actually watch the packets roll in, and you can see whether or not you've got data that the collector is analyzing. Okay, so we can see we've received 12,000 packets. 3 of them going to servers of interest, almost 2,000 of them coming from server. Then it shows you your bytes, total seen packets, total captured packets, and then accepted sessions is really the important one to make sure that you're actually going to be getting data. The fact that it says accepted sessions 22, that means that we've seen transactions of interest for the servers that we configured, for the clients that we configured, and SuperAgent is actually measuring those guys. Rejected for server means that we've got sessions, we've got packets and transactions coming into our packet capture that we're not monitoring. They're either for servers that we are not monitoring, or they're on networks that we're not monitoring. Now, since we know that our networks actually include every IP address everywhere, then it's not the network thing. It's probably there's a server out there that we're not monitoring. There is a config utility that you can use to go out and look at that. The easier way is just to have a packet monitor and look at what IP addresses are coming in. Usually, the span is going to be well defined, so you'll know actually which servers, which transactions are coming into your span. Normally, you want rejected for server to be 0. Because you want to monitor everything that's coming into the span, and you only want to send stuff of interest into the span. So that's how that works. All right, leave that open if we want. The next way to check to see that we're in data is to come over here to Console. Under the Administration tab, you go to Console, and we show you per monitoring device, per application, and per server session. You can actually see what's going on. That's a little embarrassing because the application that it's discovered so far is this port 55155, which is actually my BitTorrent client. Which, by the way, I'm doing some Linux sharing, so nothing else. But anyway, here's my BitTorrent protocol here that's been discovered running this server, and those transactions are actually coming in. That's what we've seen so far. And we can expand out and kind of see exactly what's going on there. We can see that we've got 3 servers that this collector is monitoring, only one of which that actually has applications so far. Now, to actually look at the data, we might not have data yet, but what we can do is we can, God, I really like that window. Maybe I'll switch over to Chrome here again. There we go. So I switch over to engineering. Now, engineering is where you can see the raw data that we're collecting. And the first thing I did is I clicked on settings and I changed to last hour, because the default is last 24 hours. And that would mean that I would have to wait at least a half a day before I would see any data for the last 24 hours. So what I do is I switch to last hour, and that shows me some good data. I'm going to click Make Default View so I don't have to do that again. So now anytime I leave and I come back, it's always going to be at last hour. All right. So if we look at down here, we've actually started to get data. The network we're seeing the data for is in our catch-all. So there's some client out there not on my local subnet that's accessing my application. We can click on that and we can see exactly what kind of performance we're getting. Not a whole lot of data yet, just a little bit. But this, if you watch the video, and everybody should have watched the video, if you watch the video, this graph right here is that same graph that I showed in the video, where you see server response time, network round trip time, data transfer time, and retransmission delay. And you see that all here. For this network, for this client, we've got this client connecting into some application, some server, and he's got a certain amount of network round trip time, about 217 milliseconds, and data transfer time of 119 milliseconds. My server is responding really well. If you look at this, you can see my server is responding within 1.78 milliseconds. Yoo-hoo for my server. 217 milliseconds, not surprising, since this user is in the catch-all. That means he's not on my local network. If he's not on my local network, the only other place he could be is across the internet. So we got a user out there across the internet that's at 217 milliseconds away, round trip. All right. Wanted to see what application, I can click on this application link right here, and that will show me, yep, that's port 55155. That's my BitTorrent. I click on that, and if I wanted to see which server, I can click on server and see, yep, that's Skim. That's my main PC here running, which means that once we've got data for 920, we're not going to see any more data until 925, and even then it might be 926 before the data actually shows up in the graph here. But we can either sit here and refreshing the page, or we can click on this auto refresh right here, which will automatically refresh the page for us. So we can sit there and we can watch that data flow in. All right. So at this point, we're actually done. If this is the application that I wanted configured, we're actually done. The only thing we could do is potentially change the name of this application. I'm going to go ahead and do that. Click into Administration and go down to Applications. And say Flash is not installed. Hopefully it'll say Flash is not installed. Either that or it'll... There it goes. Website wants to install Adobe Flash. Sure, let's install it. Install. If this server did not have access to the internet, obviously this would fail, and that's why we have the Flash installer downloaded as part of that script. So you can download that as part of the script, and then you can, if you wanted, you could even run that script on your local box, and that would download the Flash installer to your local box, and then you could copy that Flash installer up to other boxes you need. All right. So actually, it looks like we've got two applications already discovered in the PCAP that we're doing. The first is 55155, servers here, and the other one is 65483, which I'm not sure what that is. But 55155 is my BitTorrent client here. So what I want to do is I want to rename this. Pretty much the only thing that I would need to do. So I check that box next and hit Edit, and that allows me to go in and rename him. Save torrent. Right. Okay. Now technically, since I changed some configuration, SuperAgent is complaining, hey, you need to push this configuration out to the collectors. I only changed the name. That doesn't actually affect collections, so I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to close that and ignore it for now. But if I do back and make any kind of configuration change, I need to remember, oh yeah, I got to go reload those collectors or synchronize the collectors. So let's go back to engineering, and we can switch. Once we're in engineering, we can actually view things by network, by server, or by application. And now that I click in on an application, I can see that it's now called MuTorrent. And I can see we've actually got a little bit more data for 925 showing up now. We can see we've got a little bit of retransmission delay. We've got some data transfer time and network round trip time. We can see my server response time has actually gone up. It was doing 1.78 milliseconds, and now it's doing 6.56 milliseconds of server response time, and that just probably has to do with the type of request that's being made and everything else that's going on my PC here. Alright, I can see what client is out there just by clicking on network, and there's that Cal network, and I can see what server and drill into that. Now if I'm looking at just this application, just on this server, and just for this set of clients.
So that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you'd like further information about SuperAgent or any of the services that Aspire offers, please feel free to contact me at sweenig@aspiretp.com.